Before we start the story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. I was 5 hours into the haul, halfway to Oklahoma, and it was just me, my truck, and the mist creeping over Highway 412. The old road ran dead straight under a starless sky, lined with brittle grass and the occasional hollowed-out town. It was supposed to be a quick run to a ranch up north, hauling animal feed. Just another trip, another dollar. But as soon as I'd hit this highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed into another world. Everything looked faded, abandoned. Empty gas stations flashed by, their neon signs buzzing faintly, casting light that only seemed to deepen the shadows. I reached for the radio to hear something, anything, to keep me grounded. Static, a low hum that filled the cab like a deep sigh, was all I got. Not that I was surprised. Out here, radio signals are as sparse as gas stations. I was alone with my thoughts, and they were never pleasant company. Out of the blue, a sign appeared in my headlights, pointing right down a narrow, dusty road. Prosperity, 1 mile. I knew these roads pretty well, and I'd never seen a town called Prosperity before. It wasn't on my map, but my thermos was empty, and coffee would do me good. So, I shrugged, turned the wheel, and rumbled down the road toward Prosperity. The place appeared suddenly, like it had been conjured out of thin air. Old-fashioned lampposts flickered along the main street, illuminating faded facades and dusty storefronts that looked like something out of a postcard from the 1940s. I slowed, peering out the window. The lights were on in the diner, and neon flickered from the sign of an old hotel. But there wasn't a soul in sight. I parked my truck, engine rumbling, as if old Betsy didn't want to stop here. The cab felt tight, suffocating. I forced myself to take a breath, then climbed out. Mist curled around my boots as I walked toward the diner. When I opened the door, the bell tinkled, but the place was empty, the tables set and waiting. The scent of fresh coffee and stale cigarettes hung in the air. "Hello?" I called out, but the only answer was silence. There was something deeply wrong with this place, but a fresh cup was there on the counter, steam rising. I took a step toward it, hand reaching for the handle when I noticed something in the diner window. A woman standing across the street watching me. I turned around, my heart hammering, and nearly staggered. She was the last person I'd expected to see, Mara, my ex-wife. She looked just like she had when we first met, back in our 20s, soft smile, honey brown hair, a twinkle in her eye. But we hadn't spoken since the divorce last year. She'd wanted a new start, to move on, and I hadn't been able to stop her. But here she was, looking at me with a strange, sad smile. She lifted her hand, beckoning. My mouth went dry, and I couldn't resist. Leaving the coffee on the counter, I pushed out of the diner and crossed the street, my boots echoing in the empty night. "Mara," I called out, but she'd slipped around a corner. My heart pounded as I followed, rounding the corner onto a narrow, quiet street that looked like it hadn't seen a soul in years. She stood halfway down the road, her figure barely visible in the mist. I jogged to catch up, but every step seemed to drag me further from my truck, deeper into Prosperity. "Mara, wait!" I called out again. She stopped, turning to face me, and for a second, I thought I saw something like pity in her eyes. She whispered something I couldn't hear, then pointed to a building across the street. A 2-story house, familiar in ways that twisted my gut. It was a near-perfect replica of our old place, down to the sagging porch and the blue paint we'd chosen together. My legs felt heavy as I approached it. my mind telling me to turn back, that this was impossible. But something stronger kept me moving forward, up the steps and through the front door. Inside, it was exactly like our old home. The familiar, musty smell, the creak in the floorboards, the pictures on the walls, all our memories frozen in time. The living room was lit by the warm glow of an old lamp, and in the center of it, I saw Mara, sitting on the couch with a gentle, sad smile. "Mara." My voice barely came out as a whisper. She looked up at me, eyes full of sorrow. "Jake," she said softly, "why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" "What truth?" My throat felt tight. "I told you everything. I tried, Mara." She shook her head, looking through me as if I were made of air. "You never said you were sorry. You never really meant it." The words hit me like a fist. I'd never said I was sorry, not really. Pride, bitterness, they'd gotten in the way. I tried to respond, but the words tangled in my throat, stuck. Then, suddenly, the room changed. The warm glow faded, replaced by a sickly yellow light casting long, eerie shadows. The house around us started to warp, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. The walls stretched, the ceiling sagged, and my heart raced with dread. The image of Mara flickered like a glitching video, her face hollowing out, eyes growing distant. "Do you see, Jake?" she asked, her voice layered, as if someone else were speaking through her. "This is what you're running from." "No," I whispered, backing away, my hand trembling as I clutched the doorknob. But the door wouldn't budge. Faces started to appear in the walls, stretching like figures trapped behind thin fabric. People I knew and people I didn't. Old friends, a high school buddy who died young, and my father, staring with hollow eyes. A voice, my father's voice, boomed through the warped room. "You left us, Jake, left everyone behind." I staggered, the words slicing through me, pulling me deeper into this nightmare. My mind screamed for me to run, but my feet were planted, held by some force I couldn't break. Each face leered, mouthing words of accusation, speaking my regrets aloud. Old arguments, things I'd done wrong, words I'd left unsaid. "Why are you here, Jake?" Mara's voice floated toward me, distant and hollow. "Why did you follow me?" I couldn't speak, couldn't find the air to answer. My heart pounded, my mind racing as I tried to find a way out. But every direction I turned, the faces followed, whispering, taunting. Then I saw him, an old version of myself, standing at the foot of the stairs. His face was hollowed out, sallow, his eyes empty yet piercing, boring into me with an intensity that left me paralyzed. "Jake Larson," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're any different? You think you can just keep running? You're no better than any of us. You're the one who's stuck in your own damn mistakes." I was sweating, heart pounding like it might explode, but I couldn't look away, couldn't deny it. And then, finally, words burst from me, hot and raw. "I'm sorry," I yelled, my voice echoing in the warped room. "I was wrong, all right? I was wrong to let her go. I'm sorry, Mara. I'm sorry I let everything fall apart." My voice echoed, rattling the walls, and suddenly the room shuddered, shifting as if my words had broken something loose. The figures around me faded, disappearing one by one, and the house around me began to crumble. Mara was still there, her face softening. She smiled, nodding. "That's all I needed to hear, Jake." She lifted a hand and pointed to the door, which now stood wide open, showing a path back to the street, where my truck waited, silent in the mist. I staggered forward, through the crumbling walls and into the open air. The town was empty again, silent, the lights dimming one by one as I stumbled back to my truck. I didn't look back as I climbed into the cab, hands shaking, breath catching as I turned the key. Old Betsy roared to life, and I gripped the wheel like it was my last hold on reality. As I rolled out of prosperity, I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the town was gone, vanished into the mist. I drove on, the highway stretching before me as dawn broke on the horizon. The radio crackled to life and I flicked it on, filling the cab with the low hum of static that slowly turned into an old song, a love song Mara used to play back when things were simpler. I kept driving, letting the song carry me forward, carrying the weight of the past with me, finally letting it go. When I crossed the Oklahoma line, I glanced back one last time, but all I saw was the open road behind me. I'd driven long hauls for 20 years, and I'd seen just about everything out on these lonely roads. It's hard to rattle me, and even harder to make me change course, especially on a job like this, hauling a load of electronics worth more than I'd make in 2 years. I was supposed to get it to Nevada by dawn, no excuses. My boss had made that clear enough, and I'm the kind of guy who likes to keep my word. The night was darker than usual as I pushed my rig down Route 50, the loneliest road in America. I was on edge, but that's just part of the job when you're alone with a trailer full of cargo on a stretch of blacktop that runs through the middle of nowhere. The stars were swallowed up by thick clouds, and the only sound was the hum of my engine, Old Faithful, and the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. It was just me, my truck, and a horizon of empty, moonlit road. As midnight approached, a thick fog started rolling in, covering the road like a sea of smoke. I turned on my high beams, trying to pierce through it, but they barely cut the mist. I switched on the CB radio to catch a weather update or hear some chatter, but all I got was a wave of static. I flipped between channels, hoping to find someone, even just a passing trucker, but it was dead air. Weird. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw headlights. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another rig behind me, out here braving the same stretch of nothing. The lights kept their distance, never gaining, but never falling back either. They had this eerie, dim yellow glow, like the old halogens I hadn't seen in decades. Made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. I shrugged it off. Truckers on Route 50 sometimes keep pace with each other for a while. It's easy to go a little crazy out here alone. But something about those lights didn't sit right. They followed me for miles, always in the same position, staying just far enough back that I couldn't make out the truck itself. It wasn't the usual pattern. When I slowed down a bit, the headlights slowed too. When I sped up, they sped up. "All right, pal," I muttered, glancing in the mirror again. "What's your game?" The lights kept up, never changing position. I figured I'd test him. Maybe it was just some road-weary driver sticking with me, but I pulled onto the shoulder, slowing to a crawl. That's when things got strange. The headlights kept moving, never passing me, never getting any closer like they were tied to me. Then, suddenly, they faded into the fog, disappearing entirely. I shook my head, blinking hard, wondering if I'd imagined it. When I looked again, the road behind me was empty. "You're tired, Diesel," I told myself, trying to shake off the jitters. But as I pulled back onto the road and hit the gas, I couldn't ignore the chill creeping up my spine. It wasn't long before I saw the headlights again, the same eerie yellow glow a few hundred yards back. This time, they were joined by another set of lights, just as dim and strange as the first. Two rigs now, both following me, both staying just far enough back that I couldn't make them out. I tried the CB radio again, but all I heard was static, until I didn't. The static shifted, crackling in and out until I heard faint voices, broken and warped, as if they were underwater. I strained to make out the words, but all I caught were snippets, warnings, and muffled laughter, like truckers sharing ghost stories. One voice cut through clearer than the others. "They all went off the cliff. Followed those lights right over." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I turned the radio off, breathing deep, telling myself it was just the fatigue talking. But when I glanced in the rear view, my blood ran cold. There were now 3 trucks behind me. Each one kept its distance, and each one had those same faded, yellowed headlights. I could almost make out the shapes of the cabs. Old rigs with outlines I hadn't seen since the early days of my career. Trucks from another time. I gripped the wheel tighter, my mind racing. They were following me. No, not just following me. They were leading me somewhere. I tried to shake the thought, but the fog had thickened so much I couldn't see anything beyond the small bubble of light around me. The road seemed to stretch on forever, turning and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. My GPS blinked, struggling to keep up, marking turns where there shouldn't be any. Panic started to creep in. I pulled off again, this time determined to get a good look at whoever was following me. I climbed out of the cab, the mist swirling around my boots, chilling me to the bone. The road was silent, the fog thick and heavy. I squinted into the darkness, looking for the convoy of headlights, but they'd vanished. The road behind me was empty, as silent and still as a graveyard. I didn't waste any more time. I climbed back into Old Faithful, slammed the door, and took off, determined to get out of there. But as soon as I hit the gas, the CB crackled back to life. The same warped voices, this time clearer. "Keep going, Diesel. Don't look back." My hands tightened on the wheel, the voices echoing in my head. They knew my name. I didn't ask how or why. All I knew was I wanted out of this place. I drove faster, the headlights appearing again in the rearview mirror, this time closer. There were 5 of them now, an entire convoy, each truck looking more worn than the last, like they'd been rusting on some forgotten highway for decades. The mist grew thicker, and the road ahead took a sharp turn, winding up a steep incline. My gut told me this wasn't right. Route 50 didn't have any mountain passes like this, no winding cliffs. But the road was all I had, and those trucks weren't giving me a choice. They stayed behind me, urging me forward. Then I saw it. A curve up ahead, razor sharp, with a steep drop-off just beyond it. The fog was so thick I could barely see the edge, but I knew what it was. Panic surged through me. I jammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as I skidded toward the edge, the convoy of trucks growing closer in the mirror. They wanted me to go over. They were leading me to the same fate they'd suffered. "No," I growled, wrenching the wheel to the left, forcing Old Faithful onto a narrow dirt road that veered off from the main highway. I felt the rig shudder as I left the pavement, the rough terrain jarring me. But I didn't care. I kept my foot on the gas, tearing down the dirt path as fast as I could. In the rear view, I watched as the convoy continued toward the cliff, the headlights growing smaller and smaller until, one by one, they vanished into the fog. A single, distant crash echoed in the stillness, and then silence. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I pulled off to the side, killing the engine, and sat there, breathing hard, staring at the empty road. The fog had started to lift, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, casting the desert in an eerie, ghostly glow. I didn't move for a long time, trying to shake the feeling of eyes still watching me, waiting. The CB crackled one last time, a faint voice whispering through the static. "Another time, Diesel. Another time." I stared at the radio, the words settling over me like a weight. I knew then that this wasn't the last I'd see of them. They'd be waiting out there on some other lonely road for another chance to pull me into their ghostly convoy. When I finally made it to the Nevada border, I stopped at the first diner I found, stumbling inside with hands still shaking. The waitress poured me a coffee, her eyes flicking to the road-worn look on my face, but she didn't ask questions. I glanced around and saw a few older truckers at the counter sharing stories. They looked up, giving me a knowing nod. "You saw 'em, didn't you?" one of them asked, his voice low, a hint of pity in his tone. I didn't have to answer. I just nodded, staring down at my coffee, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. As I got up to leave, I caught my reflection in the window, grayer than I remembered, like I'd aged 10 years overnight. And as I climbed back into Old Faithful, I saw a single, faint yellow light flickering on the edge of my rearview mirror. I knew then that I'd carry that night with me for the rest of my life. I've been a trucker for nearly 2 decades. Seen it all, done it all. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for that trip to Devil's Fork. Just saying the name sends a chill down my spine, though I'm not the kind of guy who spooks easy. I'm Diesel, and I pride myself on keeping a level head. I don't believe in ghosts, ghouls, or anything of the sort. All that's just talk to me. Or it was. Then I took on that job hauling mining equipment to a deserted little place tucked away in Utah, Devil's Fork. The company was paying double for an overnight run, and with the bills piling up, I wasn't about to say no. They said it was an abandoned mining town that had just reopened, so they needed everything from generators to drill bits. They sent a rookie, Grizzly, to run with me. Kid was quiet but jumpy, all nerves and superstition. Told me his grandma taught him things about the old ways and spirits of the land. I laughed him off, didn't need any bad juju on the run. We left at dusk, just when the desert starts looking like it's swallowing the light. By the time we hit the open highway, Grizzly was fidgeting in the seat beside me. "You ever hear of Devil's Fork?" he asked, his eyes darting to the side mirror, like he thought something might pop up behind us. "Only stories," I grunted. "Some folks say it's cursed. Just spook talk, you ask me." Grizzly nodded, but he was silent after that, and I could feel his unease filling the cab. It was a long stretch of dark road through barren desert, the kind of drive where the line between night and shadows blurs, making everything look like it's moving in the dark. We were a couple of hours in, making good time when I heard it. A grinding sound coming from the engine. My rig, Big Bertha, has seen better days, but she's tough. Never gives me trouble on the road. I figured it was probably just the desert dust clogging something up, so I pulled over to check it out. I hopped down, feeling that hot desert air hit my skin, though a chill started to creep up my neck the second I stepped away from the headlights. Grizzly stayed in the cab, watching me from the passenger side with wide eyes. I popped the hood and gave everything a quick look, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Then Grizzly's voice broke through the silence, soft and shaky. "Diesel, you see that?" I looked up, following his gaze to the side of the road, where a line of footprints trailed off into the desert. They were small, like a child's, with no other tracks around them, just a straight line of prints leading toward the edge of the trees beyond the road. Must have been some kid playing in the dirt, I shrugged, more to calm myself than him. Truth was, I didn't like the look of those prints either, but I wasn't about to let some footprints scare me off a job. We climbed back in, and Bertha roared back to life, steady as ever. Grizzly stayed silent, his eyes flickering nervously out the window. I chalked it up to rookie jitters and ignored the tension building in the cab. But after about 20 miles, the CB crackled, breaking up the silence with static and what sounded like faint whispers. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard something that made my skin crawl. My name. Diesel. Turn back. Diesel. Grizzly stiffened beside me, his face pale. Diesel, you heard that, right? I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. It's just radio interference, probably some joker on another channel. But my hands felt clammy on the wheel, and the dark seemed to press in closer around us. I kept my eyes on the road, but that strange voice kept echoing in my head. Diesel, turn back. Diesel. A few miles later, we passed a faded wooden sign with cracked paint that read Devil's Fork, 20 miles. I glanced at Grizzly. He was muttering under his breath, something in a language I didn't recognize, his fingers clenched wide on his seatbelt. I was about to tell him to stop that nonsense when I saw something in the mirror. There, in the darkness behind us, a shadowy figure was running alongside the truck, keeping pace with us. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to laugh. Just your nerves getting the better of you, Grizzly. But he didn't answer. He just pointed, his mouth open in a silent scream. When I looked back again, the figure was gone. Nothing but empty desert. That's when Bertha started grinding again, harder this time, like something was crawling under the hood. I cursed, feeling sweat bead on my forehead, and pulled over for a second time. This time, neither of us got out. I knew whatever was waiting outside wasn't something I wanted to face. We sat there, staring into the dark, when a figure stepped out of the shadows. He was thin, almost skeletal. His skin pale and stretched over his skull, his eyes two hollow pits. He raised a hand, beckoning us out of the truck, and a voice filled the cab. Turn back, or pay the toll. My mouth went dry, but I managed to snarl back. Nobody tells me what to do with my own rig. But the voice only laughed, echoing through the cab in a way that made my bones ache. Grizzly was shaken beside me, his eyes wide and filled with a kind of terror I'd never seen in a grown man before. Please, Diesel, he whispered, just turn around. But pride is a funny thing. I wasn't about to let some desert ghost push me around, so I slammed my foot down on the gas, pulling away from the figure. But he didn't disappear. He just melted back into the shadows, and I swear I saw his hollow eyes watching us as we sped off. After that, the road took on a strange, endless quality. No matter how many miles we drove, we kept passing the same sign. Devil's Fork, 20 miles. Each time, Grizzly would look at me, his face growing paler, his breathing faster. We're not getting out, he muttered, like he was talking to himself. We're stuck. The engine kept grinding, louder now, and I could feel it in my chest, like something was crawling up through the floorboards. Every instinct told me to turn back, but my pride wouldn't let me. We kept driving, trapped in that endless loop of dark road and ghostly voices. Then came the tapping. At first it was soft, like pebbles against the undercarriage, But then it grew louder, more insistent, like nails scraping along the metal. Grizzly was sweating bullets, muttering prayers under his breath, and even I couldn't hide the fear creeping up inside me. Finally, we saw lights up ahead, a truck stop that hadn't been there before, its neon sign flickering like a beacon in the dark. I didn't think twice. I pulled into the lot, desperate for some sign of civilization. We walked inside, and the air felt heavy, like stepping into a place that hadn't seen life in years. An old woman stood behind the counter, her eyes dark and unblinking as she watched us. She smiled, a cold, humorless grin, and handed us 2 cups of coffee. "Road doesn't let go of those who owe it a debt," she said, her voice low and rough. "Not until they pay the toll." I tried to shrug it off, but her words settled in my gut like ice. Grizzly was practically vibrating with fear beside me. "Let's just go, Diesel," he whispered. "Please." But I ignored him. I didn't believe in this supernatural garbage, not yet. When we got back to Bertha, strange symbols were carved into the doors, glowing faintly in the dim light. I didn't know what they meant, but I had a feeling they weren't good. I revved the engine, but it stalled and Bertha refused to start. I slammed my fist against the wheel, cursing, but there was no use. The truck was dead. Grizzly looked at me with a desperate kind of fear, and for once I had nothing to say. The old woman appeared at the window, her face pressed against the glass. "Pride will be your undoing," she whispered, her voice echoing through the cab. I tried to start the truck again, my hands shaking, but it was like something was holding us in place. Grizzly was staring at me, wide-eyed and pale, and I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me. My reflection in the rearview mirror wasn't mine anymore. My eyes were hollow, my face gaunt and stretched. I felt the chill spread through my veins, like ice in my blood, and I heard the voice again, louder this time, filling my head with whispers of the toll I owed. In a panic, Grizzly grabbed the wheel, jerking us off the road. We crashed through the brush, the truck rattling and shaking as we barreled down a rocky slope. I tried to take back control, but it was like my arms weren't my own anymore. When we finally skidded to a halt in a clearing, the first light of dawn broke through the trees. Grizzly stumbled out of the cab, looking back at me with a haunted expression. I tried to follow, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, my eyes locked on Grizzly as he disappeared into the trees. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, my mind blank and empty. When the sun was fully up, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, and in the silence of the clearing I heard the voice one last time. "Turn back or pay the toll." Grizzly made it out. I know he did. He got picked up on the main road and told his story, though no one believed him. But I'm still here, trapped on this cursed stretch of road where the toll was paid in pride and something far darker. I'm still waiting, still driving, still paying for the road that doesn't let go. I never thought I'd see another trucker as crazy as me, but Jessie proved me wrong. She was fierce, that girl, bold to the point of reckless, and when we signed up for the same job, an all-night haul across some of the most desolate land in Utah, I could see the thrill in her eyes. "High pay, low questions, right?" Jessie asked, her tone casual as she double-checked her truck's rigging. She was all business, but there was something else there too. Hunger, maybe. Something she'd come here to find. "Yeah, just gotta drive, right?" I replied, trying to hide my own unease. The route was direct but isolated, a stretch of road that cut through Navajo land. People said you didn't want to go through there at night, but hell, I was too seasoned, too stubborn to get spooked by stories. By 10 p.m., the sun had set, and the land around us became a sprawling, endless darkness. Our rigs roared as we hit the road, engines revving, the vast nothingness of Utah swallowing us whole. Jesse's truck was ahead, a red Peterbilt I kept in my sights like a lifeline as we drove further into the night. An hour in, things started getting strange. "Benny?" Her voice crackled over the CB radio, a slight waver I'd never heard from her before. "You see that guy on the side of the road?" My eyes shot to the rear view, scanning the empty stretch behind us. "There's no one out here, Jesse. Just keep driving." Silence from her end, but I could sense her doubt. When you're alone out there in the black desert, it messes with your mind. Sometimes, I swear, you hear things, whispers under the roar of the wheels, shadows at the edge of your sight. It's the road playing tricks on you. Then, a voice, faint and broken, filtering through the static of the CB. Not Jesse, and not me. Someone else, muttering in a language I didn't recognize, all guttural and low. "Jesse, you picking that up?" She hesitated, her voice suddenly tight. "It's just interference. Probably nothing." But I could feel the tension growing. I forced a grin, even though she couldn't see me. "Road ghosts, nothing to worry about, kid. Just don't look 'em in the eye." Jessie didn't respond. And I had the creeping feeling she'd seen more than a ghost. It was around midnight when the smell hit. I was used to bad smells, rot, oil, even the occasional roadkill baking in the desert sun. But this was different. It was thick, cloying, like something long dead and trapped inside my cab. I checked the vents, adjusted the temperature, even opened a window. Nothing helped, and that's when I saw it. In my rear view, standing on the shoulder, was the same man Jesse had described. Dark coat, hat pulled low, face hidden in shadows. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stared. "Jesse," I whispered, reaching for the CB, "you seeing this guy again?" She was silent for a long time, but then her voice came through, slow and shaky. "Yeah, Benny, I've seen him. Twice now. He doesn't look right." "What do you mean?" I could feel my stomach twist as I waited for her response. "He's just wrong," she said, barely louder than a whisper. "I don't know how to explain it. Like he's here and not here, and he knows my name." A chill spread through me, colder than anything I'd ever felt on the road. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, and I knew she was scared. This girl, who seemed fearless, who took any job no matter the danger, was now shaken by a shadow on the roadside. "Just keep driving," I said, trying to calm her down. "We're almost there." But the lie felt hollow, even to me. We were hours away, and the desert felt like it was stretching, pulling us into something we couldn't escape. By 2 a.m., our fatigue was turning into something worse. We stopped at an old gas station, a place that looked abandoned but had a working pump. The windows were shattered, and graffiti covered every surface. Jessie looked pale, her eyes haunted as she climbed out of her truck. "You all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," she muttered, but her gaze kept drifting to the shadows. I thought I heard my dad's voice." Her dad had been a trucker too, disappeared on a route much like this one, about 5 years back. I'd heard stories, figured she was looking for answers as much as the paycheck. "Must be the road messing with your head," I said, though I could barely convince myself. But then I smelled it again, that thick, rotten stench. It was worse now, as though something had crawled into our trucks and died there. I forced myself to look in the back of my rig just to settle my nerves, but what I found made my blood run cold. Tucked in with the rest of the cargo was an old leather trunk, padlocked and covered in dust. And right there on the lid was a mark I knew well enough from stories. A curse mark meant to trap something. Jesse noticed me staring and came over, eyes wide. "What is that?" "Something we shouldn't touch," I muttered. This is Navajo land, Jesse. People say there's things here you don't want to mess with." But she was fixated on it, almost like she couldn't look away. "My dad mentioned something like this. He used to say the land remembers everyone who's crossed it. The good, the bad, the lost. Maybe he's here." She reached for the trunk, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "No, whatever's in there stays in there. We keep moving, all right?" She nodded, but I could see the questions in her eyes, and the fear. Back on the road, I could feel the tension between us like a live wire. Jessie was jumpy, glancing in her mirrors, and the darkness seemed thicker than ever, pressing in on us from every direction. My lights barely pierced it, and every so often I'd catch a glimpse of that figure on the shoulder, always staring. The CB crackled to life again, but this time it was Jesse. "Benny, he's in the truck." "What? Jesse, what are you talking about?" "My dad. I heard him. He was calling my name. Said he was right here, with me." Her voice was tight, like she was trying to hold back tears. "I don't know if I'm going crazy, Benny." "You're not," I replied, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "There's something out here. We just need to get through it." But it was no use. The shadows around us twisted and changed, and soon I didn't recognize the road at all. It was like we'd entered some other place, a world caught between night and day, life and death. My headlights flickered, and that's when I saw him. Again, standing in the middle of the road this time, blocking our path. "Jesse, stop!" Her truck screeched to a halt, tires skidding as the figure slowly moved toward her, almost gliding. I wanted to help her, but my body was frozen, fear rooting me to my seat. And then he disappeared, fading into the darkness. But the smell remained, stronger than ever. By dawn, we were exhausted, lost, and out of ideas. Jessie's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as though she hadn't slept in days. I felt the same, like something had drained us dry, feeding off our fear. "There's no way out of here, is there?" she whispered. I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Not unless we get rid of that trunk." Her eyes widened, and I could see the resolve in them. "Then let's do it." We stopped at a small bluff marked by a lone totem pole, a strange, ancient carving that looked like it had been there forever. Together, we pulled the trunk from my truck, dragging it to the edge of the cliff. And that's when the whispers started. They were soft at first, a murmur of voices in a language neither of us understood. But as we set the trunk down, they grew louder, swirling around us like a storm, and the air grew cold, biting through our jackets and skin. Jessie's hand tightened on my arm, her fingers like ice. "Benny, do you hear that?" I nodded, barely able to breathe. It felt like the weight of the whole desert was pressing down on us, holding us in place. And then the figure appeared, just a few feet away, staring at us with hollow eyes. I reached for the trunk, praying we could finish this. But the figure raised a hand, a silent command that stopped me dead. It was then that I noticed something strange. The figure's face. It looked like Jessie. Her eyes, her mouth, twisted into something dark, something empty. "Jessie," I whispered, trying to pull her back. But she stood rooted, her gaze locked with the figure. "He has my father," she said softly, almost like she was in a trance. "He's here, Benny. I can feel him." "Jessie, don't listen to it. This thing isn't human." But she didn't move. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, like she was seeing something I couldn't. And then, before I could stop her, she reached forward, touching the figure's hand. The world shifted, the shadows twisted, and for a moment I saw a flash of her father's face, twisted in pain, trapped in a prison of darkness. "No!" I shouted, grabbing her and pulling her back. The figure let out a scream, a sound that cut through the air, echoing across the desert. And as it faded, the whispers died down, leaving only silence. Jessie looked at me, dazed, and I saw the terror in her eyes. We need to get out of here," she whispered. Together, we threw the trunk off the cliff, watching as it tumbled down, disappearing into the shadows below. And as it fell, the smell faded, the air cleared, and the desert around us seemed to shift, returning to normal. We drove out of that place in silence, neither of us daring to look back. By the time we hit the main road, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the landscape. But I knew the darkness was still out there, waiting. Jessie didn't talk much after that. She kept her distance, her eyes haunted, like she'd left a piece of herself back there. And I knew I'd never take that route again. Because there are places that remember. Places that hold on to you, that don't let go, even when you think you're safe. And some roads are meant to be left alone. When you've been on the road as long as I have, you know the rhythm of the highway. The miles blur together, the radio's static fades into the background, and the hum of the engine becomes a part of you. After 30 years, the road is home, and I don't take kindly to changing my routes, but a paycheck like this one doesn't come along every day, and I had bills to pay. My name's Jack Morrison, but most folks call me Big Jack. I've been driving trucks longer than I care to count, and I know these Texas roads like the back of my hand. But tonight, for reasons I still can't explain, I broke my one rule. Never take the same route twice. It was an odd job from the get-go, an overnight haul through Texas and over into New Mexico, with a load of antique furniture and curiosities. The client's instructions had been strict. No stops until I got to the delivery point. That didn't sit right with me, but the pay was double my usual rate. What could I say? I loaded up my Kenworth, secured the cargo, and hit the road just after sunset. The cargo was a strange collection. Ornate tables, Victorian chairs, a stack of oil paintings, and a big mirror wrapped up in heavy cloth. The mirror was the oddest part, almost human-sized, with a label saying fragile, do not uncover. I'd handled plenty of strange loads before, but this one gave me an itch between the shoulder blades that wouldn't go away. I told myself to ignore it and kept on. An hour into the trip, somewhere near the Texas-New Mexico border, my radio crackled to life, faint and ghostly. I hadn't turned it on, and I wasn't in the mood for company. Still, the static grew louder, until finally it settled on an old country tune I hadn't heard in years. One of the songs my late wife, Maggie, used to hum to herself while we drove together. Maggie had been gone 10 years now, taken in a crash on a rainy night just outside of Abilene. I'd given up listening to her favorite songs after she died, too painful to remember. But as I drove through the dark, the song trickled through the static, like a whisper from the past. "Come on, Jack, keep it together," I muttered, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I tapped the radio, hoping to change the station, but the song just kept playing, like it was stuck in some time warp. That's when the first sign appeared. It was a simple roadside sign, the kind you see on old back roads, hand-painted and half-buried in sand. But the message on it made my skin crawl. "Turn back." I laughed, a harsh sound that barely masked my discomfort. "Real funny," I muttered. "Just some prank," I told myself. "Some teenager having a laugh." I kept driving, the night growing darker, and the desert around me seemed to swallow the light. Then the electrical problems began. My headlights started flickering, casting strange shadows over the road. At first, I thought it was just a wiring issue, maybe some dust getting into the system. But every time the lights flickered, the shadows seemed to take shape. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat beside me. The smell of lavender hit me, faint but unmistakable. It was Maggie's perfume, the one she always wore on long drives. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to glance to my right. The feeling of a presence grew stronger, and I could almost hear her whispering my name. "Jack." "Pull it together, Jack. This is just the road messing with your head." But as I whispered that to myself, I caught another glimpse in the mirror. It was a face. Familiar, haunting, with eyes that bore right into me. My heart thundered as I recognized Maggie, her lips moving soundlessly in the mirror, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Her face lingered, just a shadow, until the headlights flickered again, and she was gone. I gripped the wheel, my palms slick with sweat, and forced myself to keep driving. I didn't believe in ghosts. The dead didn't come back. Not Maggie, and not anyone else. But the air grew colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The second sign appeared a few miles later, barely visible in the headlights. No exit. I was well into New Mexico by then, but nothing around me looked familiar. I checked the map before heading out, and I was on a straight route to the delivery site, but this stretch of road was all wrong. The desert was darker than it should have been, the stars hidden behind a heavy, unnatural fog. The itch between my shoulders grew sharper, and I felt the urge to look back at the cargo. I turned, catching sight of the large mirror wrapped in cloth. For some reason, I had the overwhelming urge to uncover it. Maybe I'd see Maggie again, hear her voice, get some kind of answer. But then my truck shuddered, the engine stuttering, and I faced forward again, gripping the wheel as my headlights flickered once more. I passed another car, an old, classic black Cadillac, its headlights bright as it coasted beside me. The driver never looked at me, just kept pace for a mile before vanishing behind me. But then it reappeared, the same car, this time ahead of me. It didn't make sense. I hadn't seen it turn around or pass me. It was just there. Then came the third sign. The end is near. I started feeling dizzy, my vision blurring as a sudden, unbearable fatigue hit me. I tried to shake it off, but it was like my energy was draining, like something was siphoning my willpower. I was beyond tired, and my hands trembled as I forced myself to keep going. The smell of lavender grew stronger, almost choking me, and the radio came to life again, blasting Maggie's song on full volume. But this time, there was something off about it. The lyrics were twisted, distorted, almost sinister, like the song was mocking me. Then I saw her, sitting in the passenger seat beside me. Maggie, just as I remembered her, but different somehow. Her face was pale, eyes hollow, and her mouth twisted in a sad, knowing smile. "Jack," she whispered, her voice as faint as a breath. "Turn back." I nearly slammed on the brakes. "Maggie," I whispered, my throat tight. "You don't belong here, Jack," she said, her hand reaching out, brushing my shoulder like she used to. "You need to leave." "I can't," I replied, the words catching in my throat. "I have a job to finish. I have to deliver the cargo." She shook her head slowly, her hand dropping away. "This road isn't for you, Jack. It's for those who can't let go. Don't let it take you." I wanted to believe her, to turn back, but the urge to finish the delivery was overpowering. I could feel something pulling me forward, demanding I continue. Maggie's form began to fade, her face softening. But before she disappeared, she mouthed one final word: "Goodbye." When I reached the address, I found myself staring at an old ghost town, weather-beaten and abandoned, with a single building at its center bearing a faded wooden sign that read Harris General Store, my wife's maiden name. My truck came to a stop, and I sat there, numb, as the realization hit me. This place, it wasn't just any ghost town. It was Maggie's family's land, a place she'd told me stories about, a place I thought had been long forgotten. Stepping out of the cab, I approached the building. My heart was pounding, fear and anticipation warring inside me. I didn't understand how, but I knew this was where Maggie wanted me to come. I felt her presence again, urging me forward, calling me home. Inside, dust and cobwebs clung to every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of lavender. I approached a long, cracked mirror hanging on the back wall. It was the same one from my truck, but it shouldn't have been there. Somehow, impossibly, it was waiting for me, its glass gleaming faintly in the dim light. As I looked into the mirror, I saw Maggie standing there, her eyes soft, a sad smile on her lips. "Jack," she whispered, "this is where we say goodbye." "No," I replied, my voice trembling. I can't leave you again." Her hand reached out, brushing the glass from her side, and I lifted my hand to meet hers. Our fingers touched, separated only by the thin pane, and for a moment, I could feel her warmth. "Let go, Jack," she whispered. "Let go and live." The words settled in, their weight pressing down on me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. When I opened them, the mirror was empty, Maggie's image gone. I stood there, alone in the ghostly silence of the store. Slowly, I walked back to my truck, my steps heavy, but something had lifted, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. As I started the engine, the radio was silent, the road clear, and the smell of lavender had faded. I left that town behind, the last echoes of Maggie's voice drifting away as dawn broke over the desert. The sun rose, bright and blinding, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like I could breathe. And as I drove away, I made myself a promise. I'd never take that road again. Most folks think truckers see it all, and I'd have said the same thing until last week. Now, I'm not sure what I saw. Maybe I'm going crazy, but one thing's for sure. I won't be driving Route 66 again anytime soon. My name's Ray Wallace, but everyone calls me Lucky Ray. I've been driving these highways for 20 years without a hitch, never so much as a blown tire. I owe it all to the rabbit's foot hanging from my keychain, a charm my grandfather gave me the day I got my commercial license. I'm not superstitious, but you don't mess with luck, especially when it's worked this well for you. This last haul was supposed to be an easy one. Just a straight shot down Route 66, hauling some vintage neon signs and memorabilia to a tourist spot out in Barstow. I'd even planned to take my time, maybe stop at some of the old diners along the way. There's a charm to those places, even if most of them are long gone. Nostalgia is big out here, and the paycheck wasn't bad either. It was around dusk when I hit the Arizona stretch. The sky was clear, no sign of storms, and I was feeling good, tapping along to the beat of some classic rock on the radio. The road was empty, just the way I liked it. But then the radio crackled and the music faded out, replaced by static. "Damn it," I muttered, fiddling with the dial. The static grew louder, then faded, replaced by a soft voice echoing through the speakers. "Welcome, dear listeners, to another evening on Route 66. The voice drawled in a folksy tone. "We remind all drivers to be safe on the open road, and don't forget, never travel Route 66 alone." The words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't heard an ad like that since I was a kid. I glanced at the radio, wondering where the broadcast was coming from. Then I shrugged it off, chalking it up to one of those retro stations out here in the middle of nowhere. But that was just the beginning. A few miles down the road, I saw it. A diner. It looked like something straight out of the 1950s, with big chrome lettering and a neon sign flickering open. I'd driven this stretch before and never seen this diner. But hey, I was feeling lucky, so I decided to stop, figuring I'd grab a cup of coffee before pushing through the night. The place was deserted. No cars, no customers, just me and the warm glow of that old neon sign. I parked the truck, grabbed my keys, and headed in, the rabbit's foot swinging on the chain. Inside, everything was spotlessly clean, like someone had just set up for a shift. Booths lined the walls, an old jukebox hummed softly in the corner, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and bacon. I called out, but no one answered. Feeling a bit uneasy, I poured myself a cup from the pot behind the counter, left a few bucks, and headed back outside. The hairs on my neck were standing up, but I ignored it, telling myself it was just the quiet getting to me. Nothing was wrong, just a weird, empty diner in the middle of nowhere. But then I saw him. A hitchhiker stood by the side of the road, his thumb out, just past the edge of the diner parking lot. He was young, dressed in an old leather jacket, jeans, and a pair of boots that looked worn from miles of road. Something about him didn't sit right, but I figured he was just some kid trying to get home. I stepped closer, intending to offer him a ride, but when I looked up, he was gone. Just gone, like he'd never been there at all. "All right, Ray, you're seeing things," I muttered to myself. I got back in my truck and fired up the engine, eager to put some distance between me and that strange diner. About an hour later, I glanced at the clock and realized something strange. I'd driven a fair distance, but only 5 minutes had passed on the dash. I checked my watch, which read nearly an hour later than the dashboard clock. A strange unease settled over me, and I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see something. And sure enough, I saw a shape, a flash of movement, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat beside me. My stomach dropped as I caught a glimpse of the hitchhiker, his reflection flickering in the mirror, staring straight ahead like he belonged there. I swerved, and when I looked again, he was gone. I gripped the wheel, breathing hard, telling myself it was all in my head. I just needed to keep moving, get out of this fog that had somehow crept in, casting a thick, eerie blanket over the desert. But every few miles I'd spot another road sign, hand-painted like the ones in the old days. Each one bore a message more unsettling than the last. Turn back. No exit. The end is near. I kept my eyes on the road, repeating to myself, "Just get to Barstow, Ray. You're fine." But the hitchhiker's face haunted me, lingering in the edges of my vision, always gone when I looked directly. My hands were slick on the wheel, my heart pounding with every mile. At some point, I spotted another truck stop up ahead, a small, ramshackle place with pumps out front and a flickering sign that read 66 Stop. Desperate for a break from the creeping fog, I pulled in. The place looked like it hadn't been updated in 50 years, but I didn't care. I just needed to clear my head. Inside, the place was dimly lit, with ghostly figures sitting in the booths. Each one was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, men in suits and fedoras, women in polka-dotted dresses and beehive hairdos. They didn't move, didn't even look up, just sat there, eyes vacant and unfocused. I stepped up to the counter, trying to ignore the eerie silence, and that's when I saw him again, the hitchhiker, sitting at the far end of the counter, staring right at me. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Route 66 isn't kind to those who don't respect it." "What do you mean?" I stammered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Route 66 holds on to the past," he said, his eyes unblinking. "It traps those who don't belong and makes them part of it." A chill ran through me, and I instinctively reached for my rabbit's foot, clutching it tight. But the hitchhiker's gaze dropped to the charm, his expression darkening. "That won't save you," he whispered, his voice cold. "You think you're lucky, but luck runs out. And Route 66, it always gets what it wants." I backed away, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on me, watching, waiting. I stumbled out of the truck stop, heart pounding, and ran back to my truck. But when I tried to start the engine, it sputtered, refusing to turn over. Desperate, I scrambled out, looking for any sign of life, but the fog had thickened, turning the world around me into a strange, timeless haze. My headlights barely cut through it, illuminating only the closest shapes. I heard voices, a mix of whispers and old-timey laughter, like a radio playing just out of tune. I tried to turn on the radio, hoping for some connection to the present, but it crackled, playing an old broadcast from what sounded like the 1950s. "Stay safe out there, folks. Route 66 is lonely at night. Don't pick up any hitchhikers." The voice was eerily familiar. It took me a moment to realize it sounded like me. Panic set in, and I floored the gas, the engine finally roaring to life. I sped down the road, the fog clinging to the truck like some kind of ghostly veil. The hitchhiker's face appeared in the rearview mirror again, his eyes locked onto mine. "You can't outrun it, Ray," he said, his voice filling the cab. "It's time you paid the toll." I jerked the wheel, desperate to shake him, but he wouldn't go away. He just stared, his face ghostly and pale, watching me with a chilling intensity. "Take the rabbit's foot," he whispered. "Give it to me, and I'll let you go." I clutched the charm, feeling its familiar weight, my only comfort in the middle of this nightmare. But the hitchhiker leaned closer, his face filling the mirror. "Give it to me, Ray," he hissed, "or stay here forever." Trembling, I reached for the rabbit's foot, my fingers brushing the worn fur. But something inside me resisted, an instinct to hold on to it, to keep my luck. Without it, I'd be nothing. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm keeping it." The hitchhiker's face twisted with anger, his eyes darkening. "Then stay," he whispered, his voice echoing through the cab. "Stay and become part of the road." As he disappeared, the fog lifted, and I found myself alone on the empty highway. I glanced around, half expecting to see the truck stop or the diner, but there was nothing, just endless, empty road stretching out before me. I kept driving, the hitchhiker's face still etched in my mind. Hours passed, and yet I never saw another car, another sign, not even a hint of civilization. I drove until dawn, the sun rising over the desert, casting a strange, surreal light over the land. When I finally reached Barstow, I was exhausted, my mind numb, the rabbit's foot still clutched tightly in my hand. I parked the truck, stepping out into the harsh morning sun, and felt a weight lift, as if I'd crossed some unseen boundary. But I knew, deep down, that I'd left something behind on Route 66, a piece of myself lost to the ghosts of the road. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that hitchhiker's voice, whispering in the back of my mind, calling me back to the endless, haunted highway that almost took my soul. There's something about the road at night that swallows you up. The hum of Old Bones, my freightliner, used to feel comforting, but now it just sounds like a lullaby trying to rock me to sleep. Tonight, the road stretches like a dark ribbon through the high desert, as empty as a graveyard. No one's out here but me and Sammy. "Breaker, breaker, Mac. You got your ears on?" Sammy's voice crackles through the CB, soft and steady. "I hear you, Sammy," I reply, my voice coming out like gravel. My brake's been acting up, a little jolt here, a skip there. Nothing serious, I keep telling myself, but it's got me more on edge than usual. This job isn't exactly legit, and the machinery we're hauling isn't the kind you ask questions about. A few miles back, we passed through one of those half-dead Arizona towns, the kind where the gas stations look like they haven't been open since the 70s, and you're not sure if anyone's still living in the houses. Out here, you're lucky to get a signal. You rely on your instincts, and right now, mine are telling me something's not right. "Almost at the halfway point," I say, keeping the CB line open, thinking we'll pull off near Ely, maybe grab a few hours shut-eye. There's a pause, then Sammy's voice, a little strained. "Yeah, I'm all for it. This stretch of road feels weird tonight." That's when I see him, standing on the side of the road, a figure in a long, dark coat, arm outstretched in that universal hitchhiker's plea. He's just a shadow in the headlights, face lost beneath the brim of a fedora. I get a chill just looking at him, but before I can really process it, he's gone, swallowed up in the darkness behind me. "Mac, did you see him?" Sammy's voice is tight with something I can't quite place. "Fear? Curiosity?" "You mean the hitchhiker?" "Yeah, just standing there in the dark like he was waiting for something." "Well, he can keep waiting. We've got no room for passengers." I force a laugh, trying to shake off the image, but something about him sticks with me, clinging like a bad memory. We roll on, miles clicking by in the dark. My brake jerks again, and this time it feels like Old Bones is fighting me, like it's got a mind of its own. I glance at my rear view, and for a second, I swear I see the hitchhiker standing in the center of the road behind me. Same dark coat, same brim of a hat hiding his face. but there's no way he could have gotten there. Must be my mind playing tricks on me. Mac, Sammy's voice is softer now. I think I saw him again, just ahead by that old gas station. Same guy. I grip the wheel tighter. Sammy, you're behind me. You can't see what I passed. Not on this road. She doesn't respond, and a shiver crawls up my spine. I don't like to admit it, but this stretch of Highway 93 has always given me the creeps. They call it the highway to hell for a reason. And tonight, I'm feeling why. Even old Bones seems to sense it. The engine humming low, like it's straining to get through. Pulling over for a minute, I say. Need to check the brake. I slide out of the cab, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. The air is colder than it should be, and silent as a tomb. I circle around to the side of old Bones and pull out my flashlight. Everything seems fine, but I can't shake the feeling that something's watching me. I flick the light off and turn back, but stop dead in my tracks. The hitchhiker is standing right behind me, not 10 feet away. Need some help? His voice is soft, almost polite, but it's got an edge to it that makes my skin crawl. He's just a shadow, barely visible under the brim of his hat, but there's something wrong with his face. It's too still, too pale, like a mannequin's. I don't answer. I just back up, slipping into the cab and locking the doors behind me. Did you see him? Sammy's voice comes over the CB, barely a whisper. Yeah, I say, voice shaken, but he's gone now. I don't know if that's true, but I don't care. I'm done with this road, with whatever's happening out here. I start the engine and we're off again, faster this time, old Bones rumbling like it senses my urgency. Sammy's keeping pace, her headlights a steady presence in my rear view, but the hitchhiker keeps appearing every few miles, closer and closer each time. Sammy, I say, trying to keep my voice steady, whatever happens, don't stop. Don't let him in. Don't worry, Mac. I've got no intention of stopping for him or anyone else. We drive on, and I keep glancing in my mirrors, expecting to see him standing there, watching us. But there's something else, too. A soft static on the CB, almost like someone's whispering. At first, I think it's Sammy, but when I try to respond, the static only gets louder. It's voices, overlapping, saying my name in tones that shift from pleading to mocking. Mac, Mac, they chant, laughing, whispering. It's like they're coming from inside my own head. Then Sammy's voice cuts through, clear and sharp. Mac, I stopped at a truck stop a few miles back, just for a second, to grab some coffee, but I wait, dreading what she'll say next. There was a doll on the counter, old and dirty, just staring at me. And the place was empty, Mac. No one was there. I swallow hard, feeling a knot of fear in my stomach. You mean no one was there at all? Not a soul, she says, her voice quivering. And it felt like something was watching me. I ran back to my truck and the doll was gone. It's hard to keep going, but we press on, mile after mile into the blackness. The hitchhiker is still there, appearing at every turn, but now he's closer, stepping into the road so close I can see the hollow sockets of his eyes, empty and staring. I slam the brakes, but they lock, and old Bones shudders to a stop. He's standing right outside the driver's window now, face pressed to the glass, his mouth stretched into a grin that's too wide, too unnatural. I can't move, can barely breathe. I reach for the CB, whispering, Sammy, get out of here. Don't wait for me. But she doesn't listen. A few seconds later, she's there, standing outside, gripping a wrench like she's ready to fight. Her eyes widen when she sees the hitchhiker's face, half melted, the skin peeling away to reveal the bone underneath. "Stay back!" she yells, swinging the wrench at the mirror, shattering it. The hitchhiker vanishes in an instant, his form dissolving like smoke. But it's not over. As we jump into Silver Bell and speed off, I feel the temperature drop, the frost crawling over the windows like skeletal fingers. I glance in the rear view, and there he is, sitting in the back of the cab, watching us with those hollow eyes, grinning that terrible broken grin. We keep driving, faster and faster, until the frost melts and the sun finally breaks over the horizon. When we reach the next town, we pull over, gasping for breath, hands shaking. I turn to look at Sammy, her face pale and drawn. We don't speak of it, don't dare, but as I glance at the back of Silver Bell, I see it carved into the paint, fresh and deep. "See you on the road." Now, every time I hit the highway, I can feel him there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting. That night changed something in me. I still drive, still take those long, dark hauls, but I've got a new respect for the things that live in the dark, for the roads that lead to nowhere. And every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of that figure in the distance, waiting by the roadside, hat tipped low, arm outstretched. And I keep driving, because I know that if I ever stop, he'll be there waiting, just as he was that night.